It started with a padded envelope. No return address. No markings. Just my name, typed neatly on a small white label. At first, I didn't think much of it. I get mail from listeners all the time. Letters, USB drives, voice notes, people love to share their own stories. But when I tore it open and saw the cassette tape inside, something about it felt off. No note. No explanation. Just a plain black tape with the words, "Play Me," written in red marker. I thought maybe it was a prank. Still, curiosity always wins. I found my old cassette player, the one I keep for nostalgia's sake, and pressed play. What came out of that speaker didn't sound like a story. It sounded like a man's voice, low, shaky, uncertain. He said, "If anyone ever finds this, just know I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I didn't mean for her to die." Then silence. A long, painful silence. He took a deep breath, and then continued. "It's not like in the movies. It's quieter. Slower. You don't think about what it sounds like when someone stops breathing. But I've thought about it every night since." I paused the tape and just sat there, staring at the player. Because what I was hearing didn't sound like a dramatization. It sounded real. And the weirdest part? The timestamp on the tape's label, February 12, 2023. That was 2 days from now. That's when I knew something was very, very wrong. I host a true crime podcast called Silent Evidence. I've covered hoaxes, cold cases, fake confessions, but this was something else. Someone was confessing to a murder that, as far as I could tell, hadn't even happened yet. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the tape, trying to make sense of it. The man's voice was distinct, a hint of an accent, maybe Southern, maybe Midwest. He sounded early 30s. The recording quality was rough, like it was made on a cheap handheld recorder. After a few replays, I noticed faint sounds in the background, a train horn, a dog barking, and what might have been wind chimes. That was my first clue. I pulled up a map of train routes in the Midwest and cross-referenced them with towns that matched the postal region from the envelope. It was a stretch, but I had to start somewhere. Within hours, I narrowed it down to a small town in Illinois called Elmbrook. Population just under 8,000. One of those quiet places where everyone knows everyone. I checked the local police blotter. Nothing unusual. But then something caught my eye, a missing woman, reported 2 weeks earlier. Her name was Hannah Lowell. Age 27. Schoolteacher. Last seen leaving a small diner on Route 9. The line from the tape, "I didn't mean for her to die," suddenly felt like a direct reference. The next morning, I drove to Elmbrook. About 6 hours from Chicago. I told myself it was research, but deep down, I just needed to know if what I'd heard was real. The town was exactly what you'd imagine, quiet streets, faded shop signs, the smell of rain on asphalt. I stopped by the diner where Hannah was last seen. The waitress, a woman in her 50s, recognized her immediately. "She came here every Thursday," she said. "Sweet girl. Always ordered coffee and pie." That night she looked distracted. Said she had to meet someone. "Do you remember who?" I asked. The waitress frowned. "No." But she was nervous. Kept checking her phone. When I mentioned the tape, she looked uneasy. "You're not the first one asking about strange recordings," she said. "A few weeks ago, an officer came around asking if anyone had heard weird messages on their answering machines." That got my heart racing. I thanked her, got back in my car, and called the Elmbrook Police Department. I introduced myself as a journalist and asked to speak with someone about the Hannah Lowell case. Detective Aaron Briggs agreed to meet me at the station. He looked tired, like a man who hadn't slept in days. When I told him about the tape, his face changed. "You've heard one too?" he asked. My stomach dropped. What do you mean, 1-2? He leaned back. 3 weeks ago, we got an anonymous package. No return address. Inside was a cassette tape, just like you described. A man's voice saying he killed Hannah. The problem is, when we got it, Hannah was still alive. I just stared at him. Still alive? Yeah, he said quietly. She was reported missing 5 days later. That meant whoever sent me the tape was either the killer, or someone who knew exactly what was going to happen. Briggs asked to keep my tape as evidence. I hesitated but eventually agreed. Before handing it over, I made a copy. A digital backup, just in case. That night, I stayed in a small motel outside of town. I kept listening to the backup over and over, trying to catch any detail I'd missed. Around the 7-minute mark, I heard something faint, a metallic click, followed by a muffled voice. A woman's voice. She said something like, "Don't do this." I froze. That meant the confession wasn't recorded after the crime. It might have been captured during it. I sent the audio to a sound engineer I sometimes work with, a guy named Joel. He cleaned it up, filtered the background noise, and called me 2 hours later. "Dude," he said, his voice tense. "You're not gonna like this. The background, it's not random noise. There's a church bell. Rings once every hour." I matched the tone to the First Baptist Church in Elmbrook. "How sure are you?" 98%. That church was half a mile from the diner. The next morning, I went there. The doors were unlocked. The place was empty except for a janitor mopping near the altar. I introduced myself and asked if anyone had been recording recently, weddings, choir rehearsals, anything. He shook his head. "Not that I know of. But there's this one guy, comes in sometimes, sits in the back pew, talks to himself. Bit off, you know. Wears a brown jacket, drives an old blue pickup. Do you know his name?" He thought for a second. "Tommy. Something with an L. Lowell." My chest tightened. Hannah's last name was Lowell. Could they be related? I checked public records that night. Sure enough, Thomas Lowell. 34 years old. Hannah's older brother. He had a record, disorderly conduct, DUI, and a restraining order filed by Hannah 3 years earlier. I found an old photo online. Same brown jacket. Same haunted eyes. It made sense now. The voice on the tape. The guilt. The familiarity. But one question still haunted me: how could the confession exist before the murder? The next morning, I played the tape again, focusing on every background sound. The train horn, the hiss, the clicks, they weren't consistent. That's when it hit me. The tape wasn't recorded in one go. It was spliced together, cut and rearranged to sound like a confession. But by who? I took my findings to Detective Briggs. He looked skeptical at first, but when I showed him the waveform analysis, how the audio patterns jumped unnaturally, he leaned forward. "Someone wanted us to believe this was Tommy," I said. "But they edited it. The timestamps are fake. We got a warrant for Tommy's residence. What we found there still gives me chills. Stacks of audio equipment. Blank tapes. Old recordings of Hannah, birthday parties, family dinners. And in the corner, a reel-to-reel recorder still running. Tommy was there too. Dead. Gunshot wound. No sign of struggle. Next to him was a handwritten note, 'It wasn't me. Check the tapes.' The room was filled with them. Hundreds, each labeled with dates and times. When investigators started going through them, a disturbing pattern emerged. Each tape contained a confession. Different voices. Different crimes. All describing murders that hadn't yet happened, until they did. No one could explain how. Some said Tommy was psychic or mentally ill. Others thought it was an elaborate hoax. But the audio logs matched real cases across Illinois, dating back almost 10 years. Every single one came true, down to the names, the methods, the locations. And then they just stopped. After Tommy's death, no new tapes were ever found. It's been almost a year since then. My podcast episode about it, The Confession Tape, became the most downloaded story I've ever told. But sometimes I still wonder if I should have stayed quiet. Because 2 weeks ago, another envelope showed up at my door. Same red marker. Same label. No return address. And on the tape, written in shaky handwriting, were 2 words. Play me. Only this time, the date on it was tomorrow. And the voice on the recording was mine. Pause. Sometimes, I think about that first tape, the way it sounded, the way it felt like time itself was folding in on me. And I realize, maybe the scariest thing about confessions isn't what they reveal about the past. It's what they already know about the future.